Hi everybody, it's Dr. Bain with Compass Chiropractic here in Indianapolis. We're going to be talking about knee pain. So knee pain is probably the number one thing that keeps people from doing what they want to do. So particularly running, lifting weights, is the one thing that stops people from doing most of those activities. So knee pain can come from a number of different things, and if you ask just about any knee surgeon, they'll tell you rarely is it because of the knee. So most often it's because of what happens above the knee and what happens below the knee. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of emphasis on how do we prevent these problems. And by the time they show up, by the time you have knee pain, unfortunately the problem's there and it can be hard to take care of, but if you find these things early, you can prevent them from happening. We're going to talk about something that happens in the ankle that could be affecting the knee, particularly dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion, if you think about this being my foot, this dorsiflexion is bringing your foot back towards your shin. So it looks kind of like this. So it's bringing this up here. So this is dorsiflexion. The reason this is so important is if I'm going for a run and if I step down, if I don't have good dorsiflexion, I've got to compensate. I've got to change my movement in some way. 9 times out of 10, what I'm going to do in order to get over my foot, if it's not moving, is I'm going to turn it this way and I'm going to lift my leg up and swing it around. And so you do that once, you do that twice, no big deal. You do that 10,000 times as you're running. That's putting more strain over the knee every time you take a step. If you go down to the Monon, you'll probably see people as they run, they'll come up and that foot will turn out and you'll see this kind of, we call this a medial, a medial heel whip. And sometimes you'll even see people will kind of come across and you'll see these scuff marks on their shoes because as they come through, they'll hit that side as they come around. So, how do you know if you don't have enough dorsiflexion? Set this up right up against the wall, and so this should be done without a shoe. And our, what we call our minimum is 4 inches from the wall. Ideal is 5 inches from the wall. So when you do this test, you can either do this with a, like I said, with a ruler. You can also use your hands. So your hand's roughly about 4 inches wide, but obviously a ruler is going to be a little bit better for you. So if I take my toe, put it right at number 4, I should be able to take my knee and take it all the way to the wall and touch it to the wall. Now, the thing we want to make sure we're not doing here is 2 things. 1, we don't want to dive in, we do this. 2, as we go up, we don't want to lift our foot up like this, okay? So let's say you get to right here and you're like, I can't go any farther. I feel like my heel's going to come up. At that point, move yourself up to a 3, see how you do. If you still can't get there, move to a 2. Get wherever you're starting from, use that as your basis, and then from there you can measure this periodically to see if things are improving. So how do we improve this? So there's a number of things that can affect dorsiflexion. I'm just going to take off both of these here. One of them is restriction in the ankle. So as a chiropractor, that's one of the first things I check, because if these joints aren't moving properly, then you're limited in that dorsiflexion, and that's when you start to compensate. So that's one thing. Also having tension in your calf. A lot of us have tight calves, so that can create lack of dorsiflexion as well. So calf's pretty straightforward. So why does that joint become restricted in the first place? A number of different reasons, but one of the more common reasons is when we have what's called an inversion ankle sprain. So that's when we roll out like this. Most people, that's how they're going to roll their foot, is going to the outside. When that happens, this little bone on the outside of the leg that goes from here to here, it actually most often translates forward. When it translates forward, we basically impinge this area, so we have lack of mobility in the ankle. So what we need to do is restore that. I restore that by doing what we call a distraction adjustment to the talus. But at home, you can do something similar to try to regain some of that range of motion. With this, take your hands, you're gonna put these behind the back part of your knee. And in this position, you're gonna take your hands, you're gonna turn your leg in just a little bit, and then you're just gonna work forward like this, and just going through multiple reps of trying to get that range of motion back. Now, same thing like we did with the test, you wanna make sure as you do this, you're not lifting that heel off the ground. We wanna keep the heel on the ground. We don't wanna dive in. We wanna stay over the foot and just really trying to give yourself a little bit of, what I'm doing here is internal rotation and then pushing forward to help regain that. So that's gonna help get the ankle mobility back. And as I mentioned with the calf, making sure we're stretching that. So there's two stretches that we need to focus on. We're gonna go back to the wall for this. So most of us do a really good job stretching the gastroc. So the gastroc is that muscle that kind of has that W in the back. And so if we're hanging our foot off of like a stair, we're stretching our gastroc. If we're stretching like this, we're stretching our gastroc. We have another muscle that's actually bigger. It sits underneath the gastroc called your soleus. In order to stretch that, we have to do that with a bent knee. So as I mentioned, this is gastroc, this is soleus. And so this is a very big and powerful muscle, and it's one that we don't really address as much as we should. To recap here, 4 inches from the wall is where we need to be. And this is not our ideal, but that's our minimum. Ideal is gonna be 5 inches from the wall. And like I said, we're keeping heel on the ground. We're just bringing the knee to the wall to make sure that we can do that without too much tension to the back here. And then to improve that, stretching gastroc, stretching soleus, and then the mobility exercise I talked about, taking hands, rotating inward, and then pushing forward. So, and then like I said, you can keep track of this and say, hey, I was a 2.5, I'm gonna work on this and see if we can get to a 3 and then to a 4. Ideally, hopefully you get to a 5 at some point. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to us. But I can't tell you how important this is, not just with running. It affects running a little bit more than walking, but it still affects walking. Not only does this affect the knee, but it can work up into the hip as well. Subsequent videos we'll get into talking about how the hip can control the knee and affect knee pain as well. So like I said, let us know if you have any questions, and happy running and walking.